Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's session on trauma and the work that we do in Stasis-Kinesis. Hope you can hear me. My name is Darya Haitoglou. I'm a psychologist and a director of Virginia Satir Institute in the UK, London. And the work that we do in England, but also around the world through retreats, workshops, and lectures and seminars is mainly focused on the transgenerational healing that is based on some of the interesting principles and values. So I would like to start today's presentation by sharing some of the research pieces that have been recently written about, conducted, and the science behind the transgenerational trauma and patterns and why we do what we do and how it works. So first I would like to share my screen. And here I've got a selection of different research articles. So for example, last year in February 2022, the University of South Florida team, the genetics team, researched how Rwanda's genocide influenced, and in this case, modified the DNA of victims and victims' offsprings. A fascinating research here. So I'm going to read a few notes. I know you will not be, researching this kind of topics, but it's so important that we start by looking at facts. And here are some of them. So scientists with the Genomics Program and Center for Global Health and Infectious Disease Research have taken a significant step in providing the people of Rwanda the scientific tools they need to help address mental health issues that stemmed from the 1994 genocides of the Tutsi ethnic group. In a first-of-its-kind study, Professors Monica Oden and Derek Wildman of the College of Public Health looked at the entire genomes of Tutsi women who were pregnant and living in Rwanda at the time of genocide and their offspring, and compared their DNA to other Tutsi women pregnant at the same time and their offspring who were living in other parts of the world. In the study published in Epigenomics, they found that the terror of genocide was associated with chemical modifications to the DNA of genocide-exposed women and their offspring. Many of these modifications occurred in genes previously implicated in risk for mental disorders such as PTSD and depression. These findings suggest that unlike gene mutations, these chemical epigenetic modifications can have a rapid response to trauma across generations. Epigenetics refer to stable but reversible chemical modifications made to DNA that help to control a gene's function, Oden said. These can happen in a shorter time frame than is needed for changes to the underlying DNA sequence of genes. Our study found that prenatal genocide exposure was associated with an epigenetic pattern suggestive of reduced gene function in offspring. It's quite an interesting study of a particular, it's a very novel study of this large consortium, and it's quite a recent and a very interesting way of looking at the work that we do and our ancestors. Another study that was published in actually October, 2nd of October 2022. Here's how events in your grandparents' lives could affect your genes, by Claire Watson. In the wake of the discovery of DNA molecule, the nucleic acid code was commonly considered the beginning and end of genetic inheritance. Today, it's understood that chemical markings bonded to key sections of a genetic sequence not only affect the way genes are read, but can change in response to environmental exposures. What's more, they may actually be transferred from one generation to the next. Called transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. This could be a route by which the health, lifestyle, or even the environment of parents affects the health and development of offspring down the family tree for generations. While the changes themselves seem clear, the exact mechanisms at work are yet to be fully understood. Now, a new study in roundworms has shown how a common epigenetic modification can be passed down through 3 generations via sperm, influencing gene activity and development in grand offspring. Though evidence from humans of such an enduring epigenetic memory remains scant, the study of roundworms is quite revealing. These results establish a cause and effect relationship between sperm-transmitted histone marks and gene expression and development in offspring and grand offspring, says Susan Strom, a molecular and cell biologist at the University of California, Santa Cruz. Epigenetic changes are molecular ornaments added to DNA that come in several forms and govern when and how genetic instructions are followed. If the cell's machinery that reads its genome can't access certain genes because bulky molecules stand in their way, then those genes won't be deciphered into proteins. Winding long strands of DNA around major protein complexes called histones in a tight enough fashion can have a similar silencing effect. So most of these epigenetic modifications were thought to be erased and reset following fertilization, whereby sex cells are reprogrammed to ensure normal development. But as animal studies show, including a number based on mammals, it seems that some epigenetic changes can escape reprogramming and can be transferred across generations. This latest study used these worms as a model organism to investigate whether epigenetic markings are preserved or rewritten in roundworm embryos, and if they do persist, how such markings influence gene expression in offspring. An epigenetic marking on a histone protein that leads to DNA being more densely packaged, in turn, switching off genes in that region was the focus of experiments. The researchers selectively stripped that histone marking from the chromosomes of the worm's sperm, which were then used to fertilize eggs with fully marked chromosomes. Next, they looked at gene activity levels in the resulting offspring and found that genes on chromosomes inherited from sperm were no longer suppressed. So some genes were turned on and stayed in a state lacking the repressive mark, while the rest of genome regained the mark, and that pattern was passed on to the grand offspring. So we speculate that if this pattern of DNA packaging is maintained in the germline, it could potentially be passed on for numerous generations. Okay, so let's not forget, these are roundworms we're talking about. So, okay, past research on those creatures has shown that epigenetic changes can be passed down for 14 generations, which is wild, but that says little about humans. A few rare and remarkable human studies have uncovered evidence that a grandparent's access to food affects the health outcomes of their children's offspring 2 generations down the line. Other research has looked at links between maternal health, including smoking habits and childhood asthma, or shown how events in early childhood can etch chemical edits onto a person's DNA that influence their health in later life. But human studies making a direct connection between parental health, epigenetic changes in sex cells, and offspring outcomes are virtually non-existent, as one review of the field put it, in part because of the limitations of epidemiological studies that can only yield associations, not causal relationships. So we cannot say for sure this caused that, or maybe they were just associated. So disentangling the influence of epigenetic markers from genetic, cultural, and behavioral influences is also a major challenge. How do you begin to separate genetics from social circumstances or environmental conditions that persist over generations? That's why animal studies like this one are helpful in illuminating how epigenetic inheritance can shape the development and health of future generations. The team says their findings mirror those from lab-grown mammalian cells, and that other recent studies have suggested sperm-inherited histone markers are a feature in mice too. So these are very interesting, studies on worms. Now, there's also a study on mice, and we have 18th of July 2019 in Science journal, an article on parents' emotional trauma may change their children's biology. Studies in mice show how. And here comes Switzerland, Zurich, where a group of professors study also children who are orphans in Pakistan, and they compare their blood work and also some of the epigenetic markers to children who are in different environments, and they were not exposed to war-related context of life. And what they found, that emotional trauma that their parents were going through also connected to their health conditions, and some of the precursors, also the Rachel Yehuda work in US in ICANN School of Medicine in Mount Sinai in New York City, studied children of 40 Holocaust survivors and found lower baseline levels of the stress hormone cortisol, as well as distinctive pattern of DNA methylation, an epigenetic marker. So in the paper last year, she said that it was premature to conclude that trauma causes heritable changes, but there is an interesting narrative of this almost correlation or some sort of association of the patterns that travel through generations. So there's just so much these days, and I just searched literally the intergenerational transmission of trauma effects, and there were so many articles from different journals: the World Psychiatry, the Frontiers, epigenetic modification of stress hormone genes associated with childhood trauma. There's molecular biology scientific journals, transgenerational epigenetics of traumatic stress. There's so much coverage and focus now on this topic that even the mainstream media channels like Netflix pick up some of the series. For example, a Turkish series called Another Self that talks about transgenerational trauma and the work, similar to the work that we do in our retreats. That's called Family Constellations, or Stasis-Kinesis that I am talking about today, where this is looked at from a systemic perspective, right? So how do we change our stress and that actually influences back and influences forward. So there's always this sense of hope. It's not just, okay, our grandparents went through whatever disaster or famine or war or misfortune or whatever, but there's always opportunity for me, knowing that, to do something about it now in my current life, so that I don't pass on that baton to the future generation. That's also quite a promising statement. So for example, the right, that's a different one, but there's also this combination of factors that we could rely on in this life. When we do the inner work, we can turn off that gene. The epigenetics work as turn on, turn off. It's like a tap. So although, yes, our 7 generations had that predisposition maybe for some sort of illness or mental health or anxiety or depression, whatever, but our task is to turn that tap off. And maybe there will be some kind of residue passing on, but we can do the work necessary within our lifetime, or maybe our kids or grandkids can do this work and still make a change, make a difference. So I actually have a very hopeful and positive outlook for the future of our humanity, because there's so much goodness that we could do to help ourselves, our families, and also humanity in general. So let me share with you some of the interesting concepts that we work with when we do our retreats and workshops with Stasis-Kinesis. So we talked already about the triad work, the parent 1, parent 2, and the child. We're all children grown big. We always have a sperm and an egg in order to make a child. So here's our parent 1 and here is our parent 2. And we always have some sort of coping strategy, coping stance when it comes to stress. And as we looked at it there, if we want to look at Stasis-Kinesis as a method, there are 5 based on Virginia Satir coping stances in communication. So we either blame, we use testosterone and very strong sort of posture to blame either another person or a circumstance or a thing, or we placate, sort of we take the blame on ourselves. And there's a lot of estrogen, there's a lot of harmonizing. There's a super reasonable stance. A lot of serotonin is produced when we are in super reasonable, facts and figures and no emotions. Or we do the distractor, kind of a little bit of chaotic stance, where we try to move away from the problem into some sort of other topics that are easy to talk about. It could be also a dopamine-led stance, or a withdrawer, that a stance where we don't talk about tough issues. And that's also a coping mechanism of disconnection, dissociation. That's kind of a frozen state. A lot of addictions happen during that coping mechanism. So out of the 5, we have these combinations of different parents adopting different their preferred coping stance, and there's also a child's coping stance. So we have this in the middle, kind of a triangle of different colors. So blamer is red, placator green, super reasonable blue, distractor, let's say beige, brown, and withdrawer black. And as you can imagine, these are different variations or blueprints for family stasis and family kinesis, the stances and the movements, stance and dance. So we talked a little bit about examples, right? So let me choose other examples to talk about how this might be manifested in different families. So let's take an example where we have parent 1, a blamer, red, parent 2, super reasonable, blue, and child placator, green. In this family triad, all 3 members display different coping strategies under stress. The child plays a placator role, taking the blame and criticism, reducing her self-esteem for the benefit of her parents, mostly without being aware of that. Because children always do things out of love for the benefit of the system, even sometimes destructive, sometimes doesn't make sense, but they always do in their own way. A blaming parent feels much more peaceful with a placating child, as the trigger point has diminished and reduced with the placating stance. In some cases, though, blamer feels more empowered to blame the little child even more. Emotional release from a parent to a child, scapegoating or shaming are the troubling sides of this family triad. Unbeknownst to the parents, the child becomes the emotional waste container. Eventually, the little placater either gets sick physically or emotionally and becomes such a wreck that problems start becoming more of a mental health illness. Family therapists will be of help to assist the child to get their self-esteem back so they can form their congruent and level communication stance to counterbalance the triad dynamic. Another example. Parent 1, blamer. Parent 2, super reasonable. Child, distractor. In this family triad, so it's red, blue, and beige. All three members display a different communication style. One parent is a blamer, the other parent is super reasonable, and the child is a distractor. The child assumes the role of a clown, sometimes bringing irrelevant discussions to bring more fun and games, and to move parents away from serious topics of conflict. Often a child fears the blaming parent and has a cold relationship with the super reasonable one, trying to unconsciously manipulate the situation to create a more harmonious and warmer atmosphere. The trouble is that hot and cold don't work well together between parents, and the child interprets it as her problem. Often trying to take the heat of the moment from the blaming parent away, and sometimes siding with the blaming parent, mimicking blaming stance to create warmth with a super reasonable parent. In other situations, the distractor can side with the super reasonable parent by becoming visually calmer in the attempt to cool down the heated emotions of the blamer. All these dynamics are tiring for the child and the couple, resulting in adrenal fatigue, relationship problems, and often a separation of parents. To prevent and heal, blamer can learn how to become a peaceful warrior and super reasonable, a humble monk. The child will naturally adopt the stance and learn the leveling position with a more relaxed nervous system, shifting from fleeing sympathetic nervous system response to a social engagement one, parasympathetic nervous system response. Another example, parent 1, a blamer, red, parent 2, super reasonable, blue, and a child withdrawer. In this family trial, a child is disconnected from both parents. She finds refuge in hiding from emotions and her parents because it's too painful to interact with them or be with them when they have arguments or are under stress. Although visibly she can show signs of calmness and be in control of her emotions, if we were to look at her nervous system response, it would be a congruent and integrated one. Instead of connecting to the ventral part of the vagus nerve, there is a dorsal vagus connection. This means the disconnected, frozen part that dissociates from reality is activated to escape into her world of thoughts and dreams. Often such children find refuge with invisible friends in their heads or peer groups that accept them. They try to find adults who are not judgmental or disconnected. With a longing to have a warm relationship, withdrawing children find it hard to open up and take time to socialize. Another example is parent 1 blamer, red, parent 2 placater, green, and child blamer, red. In this family triad, a child sides with the blaming parent. The two blamers also argue between them and can team up against the other placater parent. The latter takes the burden of the negative energy on themselves, apologizing and trying to create harmony. Sometimes it works, but sometimes it can create the opposite reaction when the blamer feels even more powerful and empowered to blame the placater. This dynamic is hierarchical and toxic long-term when a blamer assumes the higher status role of a teacher or parent or boss, and the placator is someone less powerful in the role of a student or child or reportee. This relationship model resembles a reward and punishment and rarely works long-term. Finally, either the placator quits the relationship after being tired and weighed down by the energy level of the triad, or the blamer feels guilt and shame and finds an escape route out of the relationship. If the triad stays together, everyone has a bit of emotional suffering. To stop this incongruent and dysfunctional cycle, the placator needs to work on raising their self-esteem and stand on their feet to face the issue. Practicing, for example, the temperature reading exercise, especially expressing concerns with recommendations. That's a Virginia Satir, a wonderful tool. Blaming members can learn to appreciate the softness and warmth of the placator and learn to show empathy, warmth, and humbleness by doing the temperature reading exercise, especially the part about new information and puzzles. Also expressing hopes and wishes rather than worries and concerns can help smooth the feisty nature of the blaming stance. And another couple, just to have a variety so you can relate to, and maybe you can find one of your family triads dynamic, or maybe you know some people who come from these triads, because what it is important for us when we do this work is not just to understand what you hear and relate to it cognitively. When we do our work, we embody these roles. So one of the group, one person would represent parent one, would represent parent two, and would represent a child. They would take the positions of their body, either the blamer, placator, super reasonable. They would exaggerate it somatically, I mean, like almost like a psychodrama or theatrical performance. They would like make their stances with their body. And why it is so important? This connection between trauma and the body, subconscious, unconscious processing, is so engraved, so we cannot easily undo what's happened, what's been kind of touched, what's DNA created from previous generations, just by talking about it. We need to have a felt sense. What we call a felt sense is the connectivity between the body, the vagus nerve, what happens in our body, and understanding of it. Okay, so we feel it, we know about it, we can get in touch with it through this body sense, and then we can look into it and we can heal it, we can restructure, we can play with it, we can actually make some changes. So what we often do is not just we put a triad to understand where our parents were when they were under stress, and me as a child, but also each of our parents, they were also children. So what about their family dynamic? So our grandparents, what kind of their communication style was that between? Maybe we don't know that, but we know about them, maybe what kind of character they had, what kind of sort of generally stance they adopted. And even knowing a little bit about that level, we can also recreate that felt sense and help heal the previous generation and then another previous generation, and zooming in for each family member, generation back, generation, 7 generations. We don't know, of course, these people. We've never, maybe you've heard of them, but as we do the work, we get in contact and connect with those energies, with those coping styles, with those patterns, with those life stories. And as we connect with those life stories, we also reshape and we have that felt sense for ourselves. And it's very, very important to do this work, as we see from the scientific research, that we can shift and we can tap and we can change the epigenetic of the gene expression, not just for ourselves, for our health and well-being, but the health and well-being of our children. And if we do the work, it is felt. If we pass on the baton even after they were born, we can still influence the trajectory. So a few more, and hopefully you have a sense of where we're going with this. Parent 1, a blamer, red. Parent 2, placator, green. Child, super reasonable, blue. In this family triad, the child observes a dysfunctional blamer-placator dynamic of parents. A blamer assumes a powerful position, whereas placator takes a weaker stance to smooth the conflict. Both are considered inadequate and pitiful for the child who chooses to compartmentalize the issues and stays in her head rather than express her feelings. Facts and figures, logics and practicalities are much easier to manage than watching adults dance under stress in their familiar stances. The child becomes the reasonable voice who provides justifications and analysis, and sometimes assumes a reversed position of an adult, of a parent. This becomes a burden for a child whose prefrontal cortex is not formed properly yet, and she cannot process all emotions without expressing them. Many unprocessed emotions stay inside her body, which becomes stiff and inflexible. Learning how to move and shake and shedding this stiffness could benefit through yoga, dance, movement therapy, and art therapy. Okay, parent 1, blamer. Parent 2, placator. Child, placator. So red, green, green. In this family triad, the child sides with the placating parent, often in pity and solidarity, longing for the love of the gentle parent. The child feels the pain and empathy for the placating parent, as though she says, "I am like you because I love you so much." Even at the expense of the love of the blaming parent, the child learned to placate and assumes a position of a martyr. Often a placating parent who is sick cannot withstand on their own and rely on the child to help. The latter eagerly becomes and comes to the rescue and becomes a quasi-placating parent, taking the blame on them. Later in adulthood, such children lack confidence and self-esteem as their internal dialogue is self-criticizing. Learning how to affirm oneself by repeating simple phrases such as, "I am worthy, I am strong, I am capable, I deserve the best, the world is a better place because I am in it." Those simple things can make a big difference. And another. Parent 1, blamer, red. Parent 2, placator, green. Child, distractor, beige. In this family triad, the child learns to be a peacemaker or peacekeeper at the expense of the truth of their feelings. They do not feel there is space for expressing their real feelings, as the parents are busy being in a complex blamer-placator dance. A peacekeeper can turn into a jester who uses humor to smooth the rocky edges of the conflict. At times when parents cannot resolve the conflict on their own, a jester child comes to the rescue. Shifting topics to lighter ones, asking irrelevant questions, and making distracting comments is a strategy of the distractor. And another one, the final one. Parent 1, blamer, red. Parent 2, placator, green. And child, withdrawer, black. A child in this family triad finds a refuge from pain and discomfort in disconnecting from the blamer-placator parental dance. She learns how to stay away from the toxic and complex dynamics of parents and doesn't show emotions on the outside, unconsciously taking the role of a parent. Hiding emotions only works temporarily. At some point, the boiling frustration can explode, or a depressing sadness can come out in tears. In the extreme version of the psychosomatic disconnect, the child can get sick either physically, mentally, or both. The work of the of the family therapist can be focused on helping the triad to find a way to communicate their needs and yearnings congruent with each other, discovering the personal icebergs through revealing their feelings and feelings about their feelings, as well as expectations and beliefs, can lead to deeper and more healing conversations that can help create a more balanced and harmonious relationship. And I can read so many more different variations of these triads, and there are more than 50 of them at play. And it's just fascinating how depictive, how true they are to these dynamics, and they work across cultures, across gender, across age, and across backgrounds. So we are all in this dance of stasis-kinesis, and in order for us to work with trauma, we need to look into not just the family, immediate family triad, but to work with the ancestors line, the mother and the father line, and work bit by bit, step by step, and finding those groups, finding those healing workshops, finding those modalities as much as you can. This is the time. This is the time for us to heal ourselves, to get better and enjoy life, because there's so much more to life and so much more to health and so much more to longevity. And every day making little change towards better can lead to a long-term road of beautiful, healthy aging, healthy living, and hopefully making a transition into the realms of the disembodied realms with a legacy that we leave behind us that can be a little bit lighter this time of around, a little bit better for the future generations, and helping heal forward. That's my mantra these days. So the more we look in this intricacy of the tapestry of our family patterns, some of the generational patterns, the better it is. And it is never too late to do this work. So as you contemplate, as you get in touch from the understanding level, and maybe get curiosity and appetite to do this work, because the trick is in doing, the practice makes it perfect. How do we make it happen? How do we create the sense, the felt sense? And it's all the dedication of time and energy. So finding the right environment and doing the work, that's my invitation to you. And that's a little preamble to hopefully you taking an action towards making a step towards finding that opportunity. Okay, have a great rest of your day as you listen to this little presentation on the stasis-kinesis, the triad work, and also some scientific evidence, scientific research about how powerful it is, every step that we leave. And there's never too late to make that step towards better.